Welcome everybody. We're going to talk about putting the garden to bed. My name's Karen. I usually am at Good Earth doing workshops, but right now I'm on my back porch. And so any patience you can afford us as we're going through these Zoom presentations would be much appreciated. It's a learning curve and we're getting there, but if you can hang in with us until we get it all the bugs worked out, that would be great. We're going to talk today about putting the garden to bed. For a lot of years, what I would do is be so exhausted in August and September that I wouldn't do a thing to my yard. And then when I was raring to go in March and April, I would walk out and the place would be a shambles. And mostly what the work I wanted to do was planting, and the work I had to do was cleaning up the mess from the year before. So over the years, I've decided, and I encourage you all to come along with me, that the best way to have a great spring is to do all of that work, or much of that work, in the fall. So we're going to talk about putting the garden to bed. There are 4 components that I've come up with that are essential to having a great spring where you can putter and have fun and feel relaxed. Cutting back, cleaning up, planting, and prepping for spring. I'm going to talk about all those elements, and I am going to follow along on this worksheet, which everyone is going to be receiving. Kelly's going to email it out to all of you, so don't feel like you have to frantically take notes. Everything I'm saying is on this handout that will be sent to you after the presentation's over. If you do have questions as I'm going along that I'm not answering, just either chat them to Kelly and she'll ask me at the end of the presentation, and that way we'll hold all the questions till the end. So those 4 elements: cutting back, cleaning up, planting, and prepping for spring. Let's talk first about cutting back. Cutting back is not necessarily pruning. Most of the pruning you're going to do on shrubs and trees, you want to do late winter or early spring. That's not always true. So there are certain shrubs that flower early in the spring, and you don't want to prune those right before they're getting ready to flower. So don't prune your azaleas or your hydrangeas right before they're getting ready to come into flower. Most pruning should be done late winter or early spring, but there are certain things that you probably want to address now. If there's a branch that's rubbing against the gutter, and if there's an ice storm that's going to damage the gutter, you may want to take those sorts of things down. Anything that is damaged or diseased, you might want to just get rid of it now, because it will probably come down with snow or ice, if we get snow and ice again. If there's branches that are rubbing together, they can do damage to each other, so you might have to eliminate one of them, decide which one needs to go. Corrective pruning like that can be done at any time of the year, anytime it needs to be done. The reason you don't want to prune shrubs and trees right now is because all their energy is going into their roots to get ready to survive the winter. And if you prune, what you're doing is signaling to that plant that they need to send their energy to that cut, to restore it, to repair it, and to send out new growth. We don't want our plants getting confused about what they're supposed to be doing right now. So if you can avoid pruning, don't prune anything right now unless it's corrective pruning. But cutting back is a different thing. Cutting back perennials is very helpful, so that in the spring you will have less cleanup to do. There are many perennials that benefit from being cut back in the fall. There are some that don't. So for example, echinacea, coneflower, or rudbeckia, what's the word for rudbeckia, Kelly?
Black-eyed Susan.
A black-eyed Susan.
Mm-hmm.
Those those look beautiful in the winter. So, and their seed heads provide food for the birds most of the winter. So those you probably won't want to cut back. Sedum, for example, looks beautiful under a blanket of snow. So there are some perennials that you'll want to leave growing or standing through the winter. Certainly the ones that are evergreen. So echinacea, heuchera, hellebores, don't mess with those because those can provide color for the winter. But some plants benefit from being cut back. So on this handout that we're sending you, I've listed a number of perennials that benefit from fall pruning. These are ones that, for example, they're prone to disease, they're prone to mildew, and the leaves that are falling to the ground are going to be harboring diseases, mildew, spores, and we don't want those to be left so that when the plant comes back up in the spring, those leaves will contaminate the new growth. So perennials that benefit from fall pruning, like iris, bee balm, blanket flower, there's a whole list of them on this handout with an explanation of how and why you should do it. There's one, for example, that is not on this list because it depends, and that is hosta, which many of you may have or used to have before the deer population became so crazy. And really with hosta, it depends on whether they've been damaged by slugs. So much of my hostas remain standing in the winter, but some of them I cut back. If you've got a hosta that's really taken a hit by the slugs, even if you've treated them, even if you've tried to prevent it, the slugs will lay their eggs in the foliage of the hosta after it falls to the ground. So what we're going to do with any hostas that have severe slug damage is to cut those back. And I wanted to show you kind of what I'm doing here with this baby hosta. I dug this up last night. I don't need to do this for this small of a plant, but if you have a big hosta that you want to cut back, you can either use bungee cords, even a string, and you wrap it around the hosta so that it's all staying together. And then you just take a pair of shears and cut it back at the bottom like that. And then you've got all of the leaves kind of together. And what you have then is the hosta, the damaged leaves, the eggs of the slugs will be in here, and these can get put out with the garbage. If you compost at home, you're not going to want to put these leaves in the compost because that will just give a wonderful place for those slug eggs to mature and turn into wonderful slugs. There are a number of different perennials that need to be divided in different ways. Now is a good time for that as well, for dividing perennials. We'll get to that in a minute, but we're going to continue with finishing cleaning up. If you have annuals that are declining, they're looking kind of scraggly, you might want to pull those now. I usually wait until after the first frost that knocks them all out. Probably not the pansies, but the warm weather annuals, and then I dig those all up and throw them into the compost. Anything that's in the vegetable garden should be taken out. At least harvest anything you can get out, and then after the first frost, it's all going to die anyway, unless it's winter growing. But the tomatoes, the peppers, all of those things are gonna keel over with the first frost anyway. So take all of that out and throw it not into your backyard compost because it probably does have some sort of disease, fungus, insects. Put that into the trash or into the compost from the county. They have lots of the leaves and the plants have lots of pathogens that can overwinter, and affect the plants you put in next year. If there's fruit underneath the trees, you want to get rid of that. Fruits and vegetables that are left to rot will attract animals, they'll set seed, and they'll allow the pathogens that damage them to overwinter. You're going to clean and store any of the stakes or cages. Some of mine I leave out all winter long. For my peonies, for example, I always clean out the peonies and then I leave the stakes in place, because inevitably in the spring, I don't get the stakes out in time, and then the plants are kind of leggy and I'm trying to weave those shoots through the cage. So I always leave my peony stakes out, my cages out all year long. If you have anything like a ceramic or terracotta pot that's going to freeze, if it has soil in it, the soil freezes, it will probably crack the pot. So you want to bring those in, or at least turn them upside down so the water drains out. And then you're going to clean and sharpen any tools. Winter is a great time to get your tools ready for the spring. I want to show you how to do that, at least with your pruners. I do it with my loppers and my pruners in the winter mostly, but people are a little bit intimidated by it, and it's actually quite easy. I take mine apart, completely apart, and clean it all inside and out. If you don't want to do that, that's fine. You might want to give it a little bit of a cleaning. If you don't want to use screwdrivers and wrenches on your pruners, these are mine, but I've got less expensive ones too. The Felco is pretty expensive, so you're going to want to take care of this guy. The smaller ones work great, but they're not going to last as long. This may last me 10 or 15 years, probably forever. I don't know that I'll ever get another one. But when you clean this, for example, this is not a thorough cleaning to take it all completely apart, but there's a spring down there that you're going to take out. And then I like to use scrubbing bubbles, and I just spray it on in everything and let it sit for about 10 minutes. When I come back after 10 minutes, let's imagine this is a cooking show and I go and open the oven and there's the baked cake. Just take a scrub brush. This is a metal one, and clean all of those little nooks and crannies. You can also use WD-40 on that. I like the scrubbing bubbles because it actually kind of cleans the handle and everything, and it's not oily. And then you're going to give it a dip in water. And this is really important. You're going to dry it off. And that gets rid of most of the guck, most of the sap and residue. Just a note, when you're pruning during the growing season, especially with, well, I do it with roses, between using my pruner on my roses and anything else, or anything else and my roses, I always wipe them off with alcohol, because roses are so susceptible to disease that can be transferred from one plant to the other. And the same with evergreens. I always like to use alcohol between pruning plants. So I've got the gook, sap and everything cleaned off with that. And then I'm going to take, if I need to, a little steel wool just to get anything else that's clinging in there. And you can use this wet or dry. And then the last step is to oil it. I use just a 3-in-1 oil. And I oil it really generously. and then wipe all that oil in so it's in all the crevices. Now this, of course, is assuming that I've just had this sharpened at good earth. Mm-hmm. When the guy comes with his little wagon and it sets up the sharpening station, I always like to put these to bed sharpened and ready to go, because the first beautiful day of spring, I want to get out there and start pruning. So this is ready to go. The oil is going to protect it over the winter. I had this sharpened recently, so it's ready to go to bed in the shed. With my bigger tools, for example, this shovel, which is my favorite shovel, it's called a root slayer. I wait till the dirt dries and I scrub all that dirt off. Rinse it off. And then again, I just put a few drops of oil and rub that in. And that's going to help it prevent from rusting. If I've dinged it against a rock or something that might start rusting, that oil is going to prevent it from rusting over the winter. And then that's ready to get hung up in the shed. And I do that with all my tools, so I'm raring to go in the spring. So the important part about cleaning up is not to clean up too thoroughly. Many beneficial insects overwinter in leaf litter that's left underneath the shrubs and the trees and the perennials. So using a leaf blower, which are everywhere now, to remove every bit of debris is harming the beneficial insects that we rely on and that are having such a hard time in our environment right now. It will destroy their habitat. So what I have my lawnmower guys do is actually blow the leaves when they have to use the blower into the garden beds. And I use that the leaf as mulch over the winter. And then in the spring, you're going to want to wait for maybe a week of 50-degree days before you clean out those leaves. One thing you could do, if you're so inclined, is to actually mulch the leaves, spread them in the beds, and use those leaves as compost. It's a great addition to your beds. Heavy leaf litter on the lawn will damage the lawn. So we do need to get the leaves off of the lawn, but the best way is to actually just mow them, chop them up fine, and let them lay on the surface of the soil. And they're a great addition. They're a free fertilizer. Chopped leaves are a wonderful source of nitrogen for your turf. The only place in the flower beds where you shouldn't allow leaf litter to grow or to accumulate is if you have really early perennials that are coming up, the tiny bulbs. They may have a hard time pushing through that. So you can actually mulch the leaves and add them, or clear those away late winter, really late winter, so that the bulbs won't fight those hard, wet leaves. Leaf litter in the perennial beds, it's gonna help. It's like a mulch. It's gonna fight off winter weeds and suppress the weeds. The weeds seed germination in the spring. If you don't like it, again, you can remove those dead leaves in the spring. So the next thing we're gonna do after we've cleaned up is plant. And while, of course, we want you to come to Good Earth and buy all your perennials from us, you've probably got a lot of free perennials waiting for you in your backyard or your front yard. And so dividing perennials in the fall is a great time. You can I have probably, oh, maybe 300 hostas in my backyard that over the years have come from one hosta, and I just keep dividing it and giving it away and giving it away. So I paid $9.99 for that one hosta 15 years ago, and I've reaped the benefits of 300 hosta. So dividing perennials is a great way to get free plants. Most perennials can be divided in the spring or the fall, and flowering bulbs can be planted until the soil freezes. So if the soil isn't solid in December, you can still put your bulbs in on a nice day in December. If you're planting bulbs, bone meal or phosphorus fertilizer added to the planting hole will promote root growth, and you'll have a better showing in the spring. If you'd like to sow spinach seeds in your vegetable garden right now, you'll have a really early supply of spinach in the spring. And fall, of course, is the best time for planting trees and shrubs, as they'll focus all of their energy in what's left of the year to set their roots. Be sure to keep any new plantings that you have either divided or new shrubs and trees that you put in the ground. Be sure to keep it well watered until the ground freezes. I want to show you how to divide a perennial. Now, for example, this little hosta that I just divided, it was one hosta, and you can see that there are two separate plants. So I've got two hostas now, and I can just pop those back in the ground. Sometimes my hostas, and I usually divide hostas in the spring, but you can definitely do it in the fall. Sometimes I'll dig up a clump of hosta, and the roots will be so dense that I actually have to use a spade or a knife. This is a special knife that's used for slicing roots, and I'll have to slice those roots. I'll just divide it like a pie into whatever, 4 pieces or 6 pieces or 8 pieces, and put those little clumps wherever I want them in the garden. And by the time April or May rolls around, it looks like it was a full hosta from the beginning. And you can do that with many, many perennials. Perennials are divided differently depending on the kind of root they have. One of the handouts that you're going to be receiving is instructions on how to divide perennials depending on the kind of root. So timing, you can divide it in the spring or the fall. You dig it up by digging around so that you're not damaging the roots, and make sure there's plenty of soil on it. It's best to replant it immediately. If you need to overwinter it, or if you want to leave it for a couple of days, be sure to either wrap it in newspaper and keep it moist, or dig it into some soil so that its roots are not exposed to the air. And then you have to divide it, slice it up. You can slice the roots with a knife. You can separate it with your fingers. I've got a pulmonaria here too that I dug up yesterday, and you can see that the roots are all a tangled mess. But I've got at least, this is one plant, and I've got at least 4 pulmonaria plants, 5, 6, 8 in here. And you can see that it's going to be kind of hard to pull these roots apart. But if you just get as much soil out as possible. Now, for example, this looks like one plant. But if well, that's going to break, which is fine. And I'm going to just cut that root off. As long as I have some nice tap roots and leaves on the top, well, there's another one. That's going to be 2 different plants. So I've got 1, 2. And if I just have to cut that off, that's no problem. As long as I have roots and a plant, this is going to be another plant. And so I can go through here. I dug it up and then I just divide it. And I can fill in or give away or spread out my garden. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So I've got 11 new pulmonaria plants from one plant. Now, pulmonaria, for example, when I talked about cutting back, pulmonaria is a plant you wouldn't want to cut back because it stays evergreen probably through maybe January or February, but you can certainly divide it in the fall. The Dividing Perennials sheets gives you some examples. For example, this kind of root, which is offset roots or clumping, hostas, aster, coneflower, coreopsis, all of those can be divided. Surface roots that run along the top of the ground and just start a new plant where they come up, that's like heuchera, creeping sedums, rudbeckia, monarda. Those can be just clipped between each plant and you pull up the new plant. Tap roots, these, for example, euphorbia, butterfly weed, balloon flower, and some oriental poppies, you may have to use a sharp knife to cut down the length of the tap root. And then underground running roots, these plants develop suckers as they hit the ground. So for example, anemone, hardy geraniums, ostrich fern, those you'll find a new little plant not far away from the mother plant, and you can just divide the little runner that is going from one to the other. And then woody roots are perennials that form roots when stems rest on the ground. So if you have euonymus or lavender, it'll have a branch that hits the ground, and then roots will form where it hits the ground, and you've got another little plant if you divide those two up. So this Dividing Perennials tells you how to divide all those different types of perennials, and now is a good time to do it. Okay, so we have done cutting back, cleaning up, and planting, and now we're going to finish up by talking about prepping for spring. Prepping for spring, you're going to want to keep on top of weeding. There are winter weeds that are, you think you don't have to do any weeding in the winter, it's not true. You'll see these bright spots of green in your flower beds in the winter. Get those in the winter so that they don't seed, so that you don't have to deal with them in the summer. They can really establish themselves in cold days. Mark plants that will need dividing or transplanting in spring so you'll remember what has become crowded, what is in the wrong place, when the plants first emerge. So for example, you may have a blank spot in your bed that you didn't notice when you put everything in the spring, but then there's always this blank spot, and every year you forget that it needs to be filled. So you can just write yourself a little note on a tag and put it in. I had some perennials that were planted. When I first planted them, the sunlight was great for them, but as the tree canopy grew, it became too shady. And every year I would forget that they needed to be moved. So I just left myself a note. As soon as these sprout, they need to be moved to a sunnier location, because by the time I would remember it, they had already died back for the year. There are also these little, they're a little sturdier. There are these little tags you can get online that you can write yourself a note, and you just stick them in the ground. You can leave a note, transplant this daylily here, move this shrub here, so that when you are really itching to get into the dirt in the spring, you'll have your marching orders laid out for you in the garden. So the topic of fertilizing in the fall, and we're talking perennial plants and shrubs and trees. I fertilize my garden, but I do it in the spring, late winter, early spring, and then through the growing season. In the fall, every year, I add compost and gardener's gold manure to the planting beds in the fall, and I till it in a little bit. So the other day, my garden club, last year when we could actually gather, my garden club was here and I was digging up a plant and they're like, wait, where, how did you get that soil? It's not red and clay and rocky. And it's because I just every year I add more compost to the soil. So it's become richer and richer throughout the years. So what I do is I add it in the fall, and then in the spring, it's ready for planting. In terms of adding fertilizer, you can add fertilizer if you have a plant that has been not doing really well or has problems. You might want to give it a boost of fertilizer now, but be sure it's a high phosphorus fertilizer because that is what is going to help the root growth. What you don't want to do is add a fertilizer that has a lot of nitrogen in it because that's going to promote the leaf growth and it's going to help the buds come out of the leaves. We don't want to trick our plants into thinking that they need to spend energy on their branches and leaves. What we want them to do right now is get ready for winter and really work on their roots. So be sure that you ask at the garden center which fertilizer you should use if you have a plant that's been struggling. About the lawn, there are new rules in Montgomery County about using anything with a side at the end. So insecticide, pesticide, fungicide. There are new laws that we can only use organic in Montgomery County. And if you have any questions about that, the people at Good Earth can help you help find something to replace those ones that are no longer available or that have been banned for use. So there's no weed and feed anymore for your lawn. The best way to approach lawn care now is to allow your grass to be really, really strong. And to do that, you're going to want to invest in aerating, dethatching, and overseeding. It's not too late to do it. It's a little late, but not too late. If I do it every fall, I dethatch, I aerate, I overseed, and I top with compost. And then I water. And then what's going to happen, grass is a really strong plant, and it is really competitive with weeds when it's healthy. So by doing that, what you're going to do is have an amazing lawn because you're giving the grass everything at once, and the weeds are not going to be so happy. So if you can treat your lawn that way, then you won't need to rely on the pesticides, the herbicides, and the fungicides. So dethatch, aerate, and overseed your turf and cover it with a light layer of compost. Then you're going to apply a high phosphorus fertilizer to the turf about 2 to 3 weeks before the ground freezes. And I think that's all the information that I have on the handout for you. And I will see if Kelly has questions. If any of you have any questions, you can write them in the chat now. And remember, all the information I've shared with you is on these handouts. And of course, if you have any questions that come up later, you can call the shop.
Thank you, Karen. That was awesome information. And I think the handout is a really good idea because a big question most people have is what to divide and what to cut back. And so there's certain perennials that usually if they bloom in the spring, you don't want to do much with them. But if they do their thing in the fall, then they have lots of time. But that's good that you have it on the handout.
Yeah. So on the handout, it says perennials that benefit from fall pruning. And there's a whole list of the ones that benefit from being cut back in the fall.
Yeah, one question was about bee balm. If a bee balm is covered in powdery mildew, should they cut it back before the leaves die, or get rid of the bee balm seed heads if they have powdery mildew on them?
So I'm surprised you haven't had to cut your bee balm back already. I've cut it back like twice mine.
Yeah.
So I try to cut it back whenever the powdery mildew makes it look ugly. Bee balm always gets it. There's no way around it. And I always cut it back to the ground and throw that stuff out. I don't put it in backyard compost. In our area, we're going to be fighting powdery mildew on bee balm forever. But don't let it just lie there in the soil. Get rid of all of the leaves that you can. And I would definitely cut that back.
Yeah.
I feel kind of silly answering questions, Kelly, because if I have any questions, I go to you.
Well, we can answer them together, but
okay.
You're doing great. I love it. I love how involved you are in cleaning your pruners. I do not have that that habit developed yet, but here's the next question is, do you have a recommendation for a brand of Ratchet bypass pruners? Do you use Ratchet pruners?
I use Ratchet loppers. I have a pair of Ratchet bypass pruners, but I don't like them. I mean, my Felcos, where'd they go? My Felcos, I use my Felcos. These are my favorite, and probably you agree with me, Kelly.
I do. I'm a big fan. I have 2 pair, and when I can't find those, I have the back.
I know. So I feel like the Ratchet loppers, the big ones, are more useful. But if you can't cut it with these, then you need to move to your loppers.
Right.
So if you need Ratchet pruners, then you shouldn't probably be using a pruner on it anyway. You should probably move to a bigger lopper.
Yeah.
And I do have a Ratchet loppers that I like. So, but I don't remember the brand name. If you want to send an email to Kelly, I can get the brand name and get that to you. How about that?
Yeah. If there's any other questions later on, and you think of them later or whatever, we're happy to answer questions. And we actually have a new area on our website. If it's not live yet, it will be. It's a plant diagnostic. So you can put in your information and link a photo and ask questions that way. It'll be a little easier platform. Another question is there a rule of thumb for how far down the stem you should cut a perennial for winter?
So it depends. Sometimes right now you'll see that there's already new growth coming up, and you want to cut it right above that. So you don't want to mess with any of the new growth. That new growth is going to actually protect the crown of the perennial from the winter. So don't mess with that. But anything that's kind of dead, I like to wait till the first frost. That knocks everything back, and there's no question about what is, new and what is old, what needs to go and what doesn't. That being said, for example, the hellebores, I cut my hellebores back in spring after you can kind of tell which ones are old and ugly, and I just do that judiciously and cut one ugly that's gotten beat up in the winter around the new little ones that are coming up. But you can cut it back pretty much to the crown of the plant. Don't. And sometimes, for example, on a daylily, you can just pull that stalk up because it's detached from the base of the plant. Kelly, is there anything you want to add to that?
No, and that's a good point too, is leaving a little bit of growth to protect the new growth, and also just to remind you where it is. Some people forget where they're new. If you just planted this spring and you forget, that's helpful just to remember where it is. Somebody's asking about their bed of mountain mint. How much compost can they put on it? I don't have mountain mint. It's a native ground cover perennial that's super tough. I think anything you do will help benefit it, and you won't hurt it. So I would say usually just an inch of compost on a plant going to bed for the winter is more than enough. Someone's asking about how to winter a butterfly bush. I wait to cut back my butterfly bush until winter or early spring. And I usually cut it back about knee high because I like them kind of neat. I've let them go before and they get kind of wild. So that's what I do with my butterfly bush.
That's what I do with my butterfly bushes as well. The only thing is if it's grown really wide and there's an obvious split in it, I worry sometimes that the weight of the snow might break it. So sometimes if a butterfly bush is really floppy to one side and the other, and there's like a big V in it, I might prune it in the fall. But do it when it after it gets really cold. Like I would prune it in January even.
Yeah, that's true. Let's see. Roses are a question. So let's see. Yeah, what kind of special prep for roses in the winter?
All right, don't prune your roses now because that's going to just tell them that it's time to grow. So I wait until January or February and prune them into shape. Kelly, I don't know about this, but my grandmother used to prune her roses and then put them under styrofoam boxes. Have you ever heard of that?
Well, no, I haven't, but I've heard of adding straw and extra layers of mulch or compost just to keep them warm. And roses are as Emma would say, drama queens. So they need extra warmth, extra blankets, and extra protection and extra care. So I would recommend adding compost or mulch to them just to keep them warm and protected.
The other thing I always do is to clean up all of the debris underneath the rose bush, because there are lots of pathogens, there are lots of fungi that will overwinter in that rose debris. So I don't leave leaf litter underneath the rose bushes.
Yeah. Another question is about spring or fall bearing raspberries. Should you cut them to the ground after they're done fruiting? And the answer is no. You want to leave them be too. This is like a fun, one of my favorite like winter or spring projects is you go out there on a nice winter day and you cut back all of the dead raspberry canes, and then you just clean. So now what you could do is just clean beneath them any dead or basically dead branches or weeds from them so that they can get plenty of rainfall. And in the winter, go out and prune them. And what you would do is just prune out all the dead canes, and then you'd keep the strongest canes, and you kind of like corral them is how I do it, or you can let them go into a bush, but fertilize them heavily with hollytone in the spring.
Speaking of that, just to jump on that hollytone, we get a lot of questions at Good Earth about boxwood. And just a reminder to everyone that although boxwood is an evergreen, you don't use hollytone on it. You want to use plant tone on it. And that's just because it needs a different variety amount of the components in the fertilizer. So lots of people are putting hollytone on their boxwoods because they think, well, it's an evergreen. But you don't want to use holly tone on your boxwood. You want to use plant tone.
Yes, good point. Question about houseplants. What temperatures should houseplants be brought inside for the winter?
See, I've got house plants out here still. They shouldn't be out here now.
Yeah, it's time.
Yeah.
Last night was pretty cold, and
Yes.
I live in Frederick. I've already had like 2 frosts, but here it's been kind of mild, but it's time to ease them in. So like what Karen did is she brought hers into her screened in porch. It's nice to transition them so that they're kind of eased into your warm, dry home. So you can spray them with neem oil to protect them from any bugs that might be on them or eggs, and then kind of ease them indoors. But they should definitely be in if they haven't already gotten in.
So I'm going to probably wait until a warm day and hose them off, spray off as much of the dust and the insects as I can, and then spray them with neem oil, let that dry a little bit, and then move them inside. But I should have done that already, and I haven't.
There's a lot to do.
Yeah.
Another question about fruiting plants. Should you prune fig trees? You should prune fig trees, but not now. Do it in the winter or early spring. No major pruning should happen like Karen started right now. It's just going to encourage growth, and that's what you don't want, especially when these temperatures are getting cold. Unless there's like a wild branch that it just has to go. Let's see. Someone asked a similar question about persimmons. And so any of your fruiting trees, you wait until like, it's usually January, February that you want to do all your pruning for fruit trees. And those are all the questions so far. I'm sure more will come up, and I'm sure that that worksheet will be super helpful. I look forward to reading it. Thank you for creating it for us.
Sure. Okay, well, thank you all. I hope to see you when COVID's over and we can get back out there. If you have any questions, you can call Good Earth. You can send an email, and Kelly will either answer it or forward it on to me.
Thank you, Karen.
You're welcome.
Have a good cold, rainy day.
It is. Thanks a lot. Bye.
All right, take care.